Start recording here. So hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to join us to our DEI panel discussion today on how to build and sustain a DEI committee. Before we get started, we would like to share some code of conduct here for today's discussion. So overall, we're just want to make sure that everybody is listened respectfully and have an open heart of learning and be respectful for everyone in this call. And then just a disclaimer, we're not experts, nor do we claim to be. We're interested to learn more about how to build a positive, safe, inclusive work environment through our actions as early career scientists. And then some general announcements for our future events. So our upcoming events is the next webinar on careers for atmospheric scientists in academia. That is on September the 20th. I have the register link here. Feel free to register here. It's on September 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And there we have a research associate professor, a professor from a PUI, like undergraduate institute, and an administrator at a NOAA Cooperative Institute. So feel free to register here. And then we do have some upcoming events. Our next seminar series is on extreme weather events, which is going to be very interesting in late October. So be on the lookout for that. And then we have our guides for student and early career scientists for the upcoming AGU annual meeting seminar. So with that, you can learn about like travel guidance or some general guidance for the AGU meeting if you're first time going to the meeting. And then we have also have networking event during the annual meeting, so be on the lookout for that. Please feel free to follow us on Twitter. Watch our future events, feel free to contact us on these Gmail accounts. So with that, that's our general announcement. I will stop share my screen. And then, so it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our four prestigious panelists. Today, they are Dr. Cam Brinkworth, who is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer from UCAR. And then we have Dr. Aaron Pena, who is the National Program Lead, Atmospheric Science and Fair Weather Research at the U.S. Forest Service. And then we have Dr. Anita Marshall, who is the Director of Operations for the International Association for Geoscience, Diversity, and Geology Lecturer at the University of Florida. And then we have Dr. Kathleen Johnson, who is an Associate Professor at University of California at Irvine and an American member of the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. And let's welcome them. Sorry about my pronunciation. So first, before we start our official Q&A session, I would like to ask our panelists to give us a more general introduction of themselves and then also their work related to DEI initiative. So Cam, do you want to get started? And then we'll follow the alphabetical order for that.
I am very happy to. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Cam Brinkworth, and as Bowen said, I'm the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for UCAR, which manages NCAR in Boulder, Colorado. I've been doing this work since we started our office in about 2017, and we're responsible as an office for more diverse hiring, promotion, in making sure that people feel included and like they belong. My background is actually in astrophysics. I have a PhD in astrophysics, and I worked for the Spitzer Space Telescope in Pasadena at JPL for 10 years or so. Identity-wise, I'm queer, non-binary, and I have a 4-year-old kid. I'm a single parent by choice of a 4-year-old kiddo who is the best human in the entire planet, and so I adore him and really enjoy hiking and camping with him. So I will pass over to my alphabetical order is going to be an issue. I think that's probably Kathleen.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for having me here. So I'm a professor in the Department of Earth System Science at UC Irvine. I'm a geochemist and paleoclimatologist, so not a bit of an atmospheric scientist. I have been doing this work for, gosh, I kind of got into it about maybe 2011 or so, when I decided to dive right in and create a summer outreach program aimed at increasing participation of Indigenous students in the geosciences. So I ran a summer program at UCI for high school students, for Native high school students for several years. And that sort of was my pathway into kind of learning more about diversity, equity, and inclusion work and about kind of environmental justice, which I think kind of goes hand in hand in several ways. I was actually, our chair of our department actually created a new vice chair position for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or inclusive excellence is the UCI terminology that we use. And so I started that. I was asked to be the first person in that position in 2019, which was great because it kind of empowered me to actually try and do things and make change in the department. And then I established the committee soon after that. And as part of that role, I've taught seminar classes on diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM to graduate students mainly. I was co-lead of our URGE pod. And then I've since moved on. I'm actually not the vice chair anymore. I'm now the equity advisor for the School of Physical Sciences, which oversees especially diversity and inclusion and equity in faculty hiring and professional development for junior faculty. I'm also an AGU Landing Fellow, since we're here at an AGU event, which is a leadership development and diversity initiative training program that I've been participating in for 2 years. And I've just launched a new initiative at UCI with NSF funding from Cultural Transformation of the Geoscience Community program at NSF, which is aimed around training postbac and PhD students in climate change and environmental justice and community engagement. Sorry, that was long.
Well,
Oh,
thank
do I
you.
bounce? Who's next?
Yeah, you can tell.
Anita, I think, if we're going by last name.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anita Marshall. I'm a lecturer at the University of Florida. I'm also the director of the International Association for Geoscience Diversity. I'm a geoscience education researcher primarily. My classic training is as a volcanologist using geophysical techniques. I am really active in a lot of DEI work, locally and nationally. Here at UF, I run our diversity and our DEI committee for our department, which was just founded as when I got hired, and I took over as chair about a year ago. And so it's been nice to be able to have that mechanism to bring the diversity inclusion work that I do in my research and in my professional role into the department and try to make some positive changes in that very local environment, beyond just, what I do for my job. So yeah, that's nice.
Hey everyone, I'm Aaron. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm clearing on a mobile hotspot. I'm a national program leader for atmospheric science and fire weather at the U.S. Forest Service, and kind of to first thought that may be like, what does that have to do with DEI? But as a national program lead, I feel it's my duty that I'm ensuring that national level meetings, other types of engagements are inclusive and as accessible as possible. Also, our hiring practices within the U.S. Forest Service Research and Development, which is where I work. And so kind of having that level of engagement. But, DEI is also all around us, whether it's in our jobs and at our institutions. But it's also in our scientific societies in which we volunteer, and we also convene, at least once per year to, thinking about AGU, but even in the businesses that we patronize. So in thinking about that, in the past, I have been part of forming local and university chapters, particularly around areas that I identify as gay. I also am Hispanic. So thinking about some of these affinity groups that I have fallen into. So OSTEM, out in STEM, for LGBTQ scientists, technologists, engineering folks, and mathematicians. That was something that I started a local chapter in Northern Colorado. I also served as a chair of the American Meteorological Society's Board on Representation, Accessibility, Inclusion, and Diversity. That was formerly the Board on Women and Minorities. And I remember there was a meeting, actually Cam was with me in that meeting, and the president of the AMS looked around and asked, there were 3 queers in this room, but the AMS president looked around and said, where's representation beyond women and minorities? And so that was kind of the impetus for thinking about how do we, recategorize, not categorize, but how do we, reinvent kind of what we're thinking about, what are we called, what is our mission within the American Meteorological Society. So that was a change to the name BRAID, Board on Representation, Accessibility, Inclusion, and Diversity. Also, prior to being at US Forest Service, I was at NASA headquarters, where I co-chaired their JEDI, the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion team. And I also led some environmental justice initiatives. So thinking about higher level management, thinking about funding, especially towards environmental justice types initiatives. I was involved in a lot of that there as well. So nice to be here, and thanks for setting this up, Bowen.
Yeah, thank you for the great introduction, and then thank you for all your great work with DEI initiatives. So, so just for some general housekeeping, and then anyone have questions, you can type it in the chat. And then we're gonna start with our discussion with our first question. I think it's a great to follow up with Aaron's introduction of his work. Is like, what is the general purpose and end goal for a DEI committee that we are forming, and then how to establish a general DEI committee goals for everybody. Maybe we'll go the reverse order, start with Aaron, and then go back. Yep.
Yeah, I'll try to keep these all short. I know we have a number of panelists. So one of the things in terms of the purpose and end goals, I try to collectively establish goals. So not just have my own brain, but also include a lot of folks, kind of like an advisory committee, for instance, or having, multiple heads are better than one, and not just having kind of this, one person tunnel vision type thinking, but collectively start, kind of thinking around kind of our end goals. And so leading with a committee of folks as opposed to just one person.
I think Anita, you're next.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure how we're doing this, if we all respond to all the questions or what. Since our committee was new, one of the very first things we did was sort of an informal climate survey of the department, because we wanted our goals to be informed by the needs that we actually had. So we wanted to kind of see where we were at, and we used that survey then to articulate what our mission and goals should be for our committee. And that was very helpful to see where the needs were and where we could make the biggest impact, and then we kind of organized it by like low-hanging fruit, like easy stuff we could knock down quick, more challenging things that would take more time. And yeah, so we use that survey to articulate our goals.
That's great. Great idea. And then Caitlin and Cam, do you all have anything to chime in? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, similar to Aaron, we also took a really collective approach in terms of really collaborating to decide what we wanted to focus on, and we also relied in part on a climate survey as well. which I think is a really great idea for any department who just to get some baseline information about how people are feeling in the department, and what some of the main issues are. Our graduate students actually have been doing a climate survey annually for grad students and postdocs in the department, and then they come share the results with the faculty at a faculty meeting. And so that informs some of our work. And then in the last year, we just had a broader climate survey conducted that was for everybody. But in terms of kind of how we're framing our goals, one thing that I found really helpful, and when I was thinking about all the different areas that we're trying to work on, was, I don't know if you've seen the paper by Hendrada Ali in 2021 about the 6 essential constructs for effective anti-racism in geoscience organizations, which is a lot of very practical advice around kind of the different areas. I won't go through them all, but I would recommend that paper for sure. I can put a link in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And Cam, do you have anything to add in?
Yeah, I think that I'm in a bit of a unique situation in that I'm not creating a DEI committee. DEI committees are being created and then working with me. And so I think that as you're thinking about your goals, considering, is there a DEI strategic plan at your organization that you can fit into? Because the more that you can tie into existing goals for your organization, the better. I think also thinking about who are your advocates going to be, who are your champions? Because as a DEI committee, you're going to have some authority and some power. But if you can find people in faculty positions who can be your advocates and your champions and find out what they're interested in, I think that's going to be really, really helpful for you to think about how you get your goals sorted out and actually, to have them implemented. Thinking about, is there a DEI office in your organization that you can work with? Where are the levers that you can pull to start working and to think about how you fit into the existing infrastructure? Because I tell you, I have some DEI committees at our organization. We have many. We have employee resource groups who are identity level kind of DEI committees, but we also have them for every single lab program and office. And I get far more excited when people are coming to me saying, hey, I want to do this thing that changes structure at our organization. Like, for example, we don't have anything right now, or we didn't used to have anything in our people management system that allow people to choose anything other than a binary gender. And they came to us saying, this is not okay, we need to change this. And so that was something I could get my teeth into far more than, hey, we want to have a potluck that's based around someone's cultural identity. Potlucks are fine, but they don't interest me, right? What interests me is when we're making structural change. And so thinking about your goals, what do you really want to change at your organization that would really make a difference? And think big and think about then who you can work with and how does it fit into existing DEI goals at your institution. And that's the way that you really start to make change.
That's great insight. I think that go along with another question of us. It's like, how can an institution, like an upper level, help to make the DEI committee to be more visible, and how to encourage us as general early career scientists who want to participate in DEI activities. So do you all have any suggestion for the upper level management from the agencies? How can they support students and early career scientists to be more involved in DEI activities? We can all, Cam, do you want to start? And then we can go.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk from my perspective, because I say I am working with folks who are coming to me. I think, my responsibility as a DEI chief is to try and help those DEI committees get their goals met, right? And so I meet with all of our DEI committees at least once a quarter. And there are many of them. I meet them with as a group. We don't do separate meetings. There'll be meetings all day with DEI committees, but I meet with the lab, program and office DEI committees once a quarter, and then with the EIGs once a quarter to understand their goals and where they want to go. And so if people are an official committee, they get access to our communications team as well to be doing internal communications to help raise their visibility, and they get a web page and they get, all that kind of thing. So I think setting up a formal framework and infrastructure is really important for that. We have ERGs come present at President's Council every now and again about their work, and so this is basically like the people who run the organization. It's the president and then that top level of leadership. So the President's Council happens every month, and we maybe have an EIG come every half a year or something. Yeah, so I think just ways in which we can boost that visibility is great, but also they know they can come to me at any time. And so whatever they want to get done, I'm very much open and all ears about it. And I make sure that I respond to them, as quickly as possible to keep that information flowing. And it's a two-way system, right? If I have goals that I need to get met and I need advocates in the labs and programs and offices, that I can send information back the other way. So it's a beautiful two-way street, and it works very, very well for everyone. I really appreciate all our committees, because they have reach that I just simply don't have. And so, the fact that they are on the ground and they understand what's going on and can give me information and, help squash rumors is superb. So yeah, find out how you can work with your upper level leadership. It's important. Find your advocates.
That's great. So Anita, do you want to chime in on that too? I see you unmute yourself.
Yeah, this question is taking on some interesting challenges here in Florida. We're actually not really supposed to be doing this kind of work anymore. So our big challenge has been trying to find ways to work around upper level leadership and continue this work when we're really not supposed to be doing it anymore. So yeah, it's kind of turned this question on its head, and rather than trying to get upper level buy-in, we're just trying to get them to leave us alone so we can do this kind of work. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great job of you all there to like still trying to organize regular meetings and then have this DEI initiative still there. I
I mean,
really
we're not
appreciate
even
that.
supposed to be calling ourselves a DEI committee. We just haven't renamed ourselves yet. But like even that, it just takes up all this bandwidth that we could be working on other things. Instead, we're trying to figure out, okay, we're supposed to take our diversity statement down off our website. What are we going to do about that? We're not supposed to have a DEI committee. What are we going to call ourselves so we can keep working on our goals? So we have we have very different challenges here in Florida about this right now. So yeah.
And I think, Anita, that's just it's very difficult in that situation, right? And my heart goes out to you for sure, because man, working in that environment must be super difficult. And I think the question is, how much can you rename? I mean, yeah, we've had a lot of conversations in our organization about ruthless practicality. And it's like, it's all very well using the right words for things, but if the right words get in the way of your goals, use different words,
Yep.
And that's just what we're having to do. It's on some level as well, not because of your situation where you're actually not allowed to do it, but our situation where we have people who react badly to certain words, and so we just don't use those words anymore, right? And so I think thinking about how you can be ruthlessly practical and find people who still care about this and want to do it quietly and
Yep.
behind the scenes, it's the only way you can work it. And just I have I'm so impressed by all of you who are still working on this, even in that environment. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. And Aaron, yeah, I think you unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to, this is, depending on, state by state, institution by institution, it comes from, I feel like some of the practice that I've had is, about 10 years ago, talking about climate, and climate change and global warming, and thinking about that, and especially coming, from an area in rural Texas or from a family where, you would start changing the words. And so, something with the term diversity, I've taken that to bring on like an ecological definition of diversity, and the diversity of thought. And typically, reframing this is I think that this is when you start getting, especially when you start getting questions, this has happened at past institutions where talking about DEI, and the question comes up, well, what's the end goal? How long are we going to need this committee? There are people who end up being combative. And so I think, some of the tools that I have done is find those folks in, upper level management, who are the allies, who do get it, who do want to do better. And those are the people that I kind of have clinged on to and make sure that they are aware of some of the activities, inviting them to moderate, inviting them to be part of either the committees, if there's a panel. Obviously not too much, especially, for folks if they are, overcommitted or they're being overtaxed in terms of being invited. But I know, I mentioned I was at NASA headquarters before this, and before I was at Forest Service, and thinking about inclusion plans that were required for certain calls for funding. And so that was in the nascent stages when I left, but thinking about inclusion plans and, putting that out to the communities to require. But really smartly thinking about it, again, going back to this collective ideas of, not making these types of decisions for instance, in inclusion plans in isolation. There are institutions who have, help with grant writing. So maybe R2 institutions or other smaller institutions may not have those types of resources to draw up inclusion plans. So making sure you're talking, getting out into the community to, you're talking with all types of institutions. And so not just attending the AGU or the AMSs of the world, but also the HBCU Climate Change Conference that goes on every year. I attended last year. I think that was it was like AGU on steroids. You had communities dealing with PhD scientists, people from all different backgrounds and identities. Getting out into the communities and just listening to folks. So there are surveys, one great instrument. RFIs, requests for information, are one great instrument, but I think also just getting out and talking with people and getting into those communities and listening to the needs and bringing that back are really helpful.
I will give one other recommendation, and that is this absolutely wonderful book. It's called DEI Deconstructed, and it is phenomenal. And it's what my office, even though we have many decades of experience of doing this work, this book is phenomenal. And Lily has just written a follow-up book called DEI Reconstructed that's going to be out, I think, November 16th. And so I highly recommend this. It talks a lot about different types of power as ways to make change, because it's not only hierarchical power. There are many different, like 8 different types of power. And so thinking about ways in which you fit in and the types of people that you need in order to make your initiatives work is a lot of what Lily talks about in this book. So yeah, highly recommend that as a place to start if you are thinking about setting something up.
Yeah, can I chime in on that still? So I really agree with everything that's been said so far in terms of needing to understand and kind of adapt your plan to your individual institution. Who are the leadership, and are there constraints on what you're allowed to do or say? And I'm very lucky. I always feel like when I'm talking to friends and colleagues who are in places like Florida or Texas, where these efforts are really illegal or under assault, because in the culture at the University of California is so focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion now that it's expected for leadership to be actively supportive of these efforts. It doesn't mean there's not resistance still at like individual levels from certain people, but it does mean that when you have leadership who is vocally valuing the work, not just vocally, but also putting resources behind it, that really is how I think you can achieve more institutional change, which is the goal really. Just some examples of things that have been helpful at UCI, and I understand this is not necessarily something that students and early career folks have the power to change. But you may already have people in your leadership that you can reach out to about these things, or you can kind of take this with you as you progress in your career at least. But so we have a structure where we now have, it's quite normal now for most departments to have a vice chair for DEI, and many of the schools, almost all of them, I think at UCI now have an associate dean for DEI as well, and then we have a vice chancellor across campus. So there's many different levels of administration, and there's a lot of value that is added from those folks that are in these positions. In part, making clear that this work, actually doing the work actually is valued during hiring and promotion. So that's something that I think is really critical for changing the culture and making clear that, you know, we're not going to hire faculty who are you know, actively anti-DEI, I'd say. There are ways to increase visibility and recognize people for the work, also not just through hiring and promotion, but through creating awards. For example, like we do a departmental level award for graduate students focused on excellence in or inclusive excellence, and there's campus-wide awards as well around those lines. There's also been funding opportunities, so just for small amounts of money, but things that, you know, people can apply, individuals, anyone in the department or school can apply to get funding to organize some DEI related events or activity. So things like that. And then I think somebody had already mentioned as well, kind of, I think Cam had mentioned, you know, meeting with DEI committees and, you know, they're in a leadership role, but I guess from the committee perspective, asking to speak to faculty, come to a faculty meeting, ask to speak to the dean. They are generally very happy to hear from folks, at least in my institution. I understand that might not be the case everywhere, but yeah.
Great, thank you for the inputs. And then if anyone have questions, please feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself. And then I think kind of a follow-on question, or just with your point, it's like a lot of institution, for example, for the early career scientists, they ask us to write a DEI statement in order like to just generally speaking to our like work with DEI, like, but how in the future, how are they gonna be evaluated as the faculty being promoted and stuff like that from the institution? Can you give us some insight on the DEI statement and how the evaluation of it? Okay, anybody can feel free to unmute.
I can address that.
Yep.
I've read a lot of DEI statements and served on a lot of search committees, and in my role as equity advisor, I also read all of them for everybody who applies for a faculty, who makes a short list anyway for a faculty position in our school. And I will say, at least from our perspective, they are very valued. And, you know, we've moved towards, you know, a lot of universities that require these have moved towards, you know, using a rubric to evaluate them. There's a really well-known rubric that UC Berkeley created that has been adopted by many, many different places. And that's one of the ones that we've basically used in some of our work, and effectively it evaluates these statements in kind of broad categories. It's kind of general awareness and knowledge about DEI, but the DEI statement shouldn't really just be about expressing your values and what you know. The DEI statement is really should be focused on what you've done and what you plan to do. So demonstrating that you've actually participated in some DEI focused activities or led them, as well as, you know, have taken the time to look at the institution that you're applying to and learn a bit about some of the things that are going on there and how you might contribute. It doesn't have to be like, I'm going to propose to, you know, a massive new program or initiative that I'm going to lead. It could be as simple as, you know, highlighting, you know, different things that are already taking place and how you'd like to get involved. So I do think that they are valued in many places, and like I was saying, and you know, I'm sure this would be seen as controversial in some settings, but I think that, you know, it can really make or break your application. Yeah.
I'll add two things in there, Kathleen. That was a great summary, and a couple of things. First one is, it doesn't have to be stuff that you have done in your institution, because we are well aware that some institutions just don't do this stuff and you don't have those opportunities. But if you're doing it in your personal life, that's 100% okay. And I had a second point that has completely slipped my mind right now. It was something that you mentioned about rubrics, and it's gone. Never mind, it'll come back to me.
Feel free to jump in if you think about it. And then any other insights from Aaron or Anita on that?
I'm not at an institution, but or sorry, I'm not at an academic institution. But in terms of on hiring or even on the funding side, when these are being, when these are being requested, inclusion plans, a DEI plan, et cetera, from early career folks, it's one element is also just thinking deliberately about DEI, and even just that understanding that it's not just an abstract that's not an abstract acronym, that diversity has a separate meaning than equity, which has a different meaning than inclusion and accessibility, justice, belonging. Thinking about those deliberately, that's what has been asked, and thinking deeply, thinking about what those mean individually to you. And so the other thing is, I often hear from folks, Cam was talking about power structures earlier. I get, as a white presenting male, I get to hear a lot from other white presenting males about how DEI is ruining their careers, and luckily I get to push back, and I have that ammo to push back. But thinking about how, even if you feel you don't have that type of any type of backgrounds for, being an issue advocate, is something more than just kind of sitting idly by. And so being an advocate for groups, typically, oftentimes, these are affinity groups that may impact your life, or maybe indirectly. Maybe you have a sibling or a family member, who might identify as queer, or who might have accessibility needs. And so, how are you, considering those, in your personal space, in your personal life, but also advocating in your professional life. So also bringing that power, that power structure to also to work.
Sounds great.
Aaron, sorry, Bowen, I've just remembered what it was I was going to say.
Great.
What Kathleen mentioned was, when you're talking about what you're going to do at an institution, it doesn't have to be this huge, great, big new initiative. And what I will say actually is that it works against you sometimes if you're proposing a big new initiative without having thought about what already exists at the organization and how you can fit into that. Because if you come in saying, I'm going to do this huge, great, big thing, and we're all sat there going, did you not read our DEI strategic plan? Right? And so making sure that you have read any documentation that exists, and that you are thinking about the context in which you're going into and fitting into existing initiatives there is going to be more powerful as a reader than coming in and suggesting something brand new when you don't know the context of our institution. And it's better to just come in softly. Don't come in believing that you know better than us about our institution, because I promise you don't. But great points there, Aaron. I appreciated all your thoughts there too.
Great point. Yeah, if any of you audience have questions, please feel free to jump in and ask. And yeah, we have a question in the chat right now. Can you offer suggestions on how to approach upper level management with challenging the subtle biases that exist? As mentioned in the documentary Picture a Scientist, produced a few years back, A Ton of Feathers is still a ton of feathers. Anyone want to jump into that? Yeah, it's a hard question.
I think sometimes it can be hard to do, but numbers often talk to these kind of things. So anything you can bring from, say, the abstract into the concrete is very helpful on challenging these biases. There was oh man, I can't, I'm blanking on the name. There was a scientist a number of years ago that went around and collected measurements of the square footage of lab space that women scientists were given versus male presenting scientists at major institutions in the US, and used that to back up all the other things that they'd brought up about the subtle ways that women were being discriminated against, or basically put on a shorter foot, in these very subtle little ways. And they use that you know, they were able to use that metric of, okay, look, we get overall significantly less square footage to do our science than the guys. Like, and this is just one example that if we actually measured this, like, we can bring this evidence. I don't know what it is with some of these upper level folks, like they love numbers. They they want numbers. They want some sort of quantification that kind of lends some support to, you know, the biases that you're trying to, you know, bring attention to. So
So I want to jump in here in terms of the suggestions on how to approach upper level management. So something that happened while in the past institution that I was at, there's something called the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, FEVS. And this is something that every federal institution, their employees take. But it's only the federal employees, it's not the contractors. But also, so there are, you may hear some places that tout some federal agencies that tout, they may be one of the best places to work in the United States, or maybe they're the least favorite. And one of the things that I challenged was, I think there was something like 85% happiness or satisfaction with the workplace. So I started challenging the upper level management, or it was more mid-level management, and started thinking about who are these other 15%? Why is it only 85? Why that 85%? We take that number as majority and we think that that's good. But who are the 15%? And so we started breaking that down by gender, ethnicity, and race, time in service, career stage, etc., and started really asking these questions. And so again, going back to Anita's excellent point on numbers, really speak volumes. Something like that is challenging in thinking about who are the people who are being left out, who are the people who are not feeling welcome. And so bringing those types of points up, I think, is something this is a concrete example of something that I did in the past. And so what that started was in-depth studies, at that level. And I plan to bring that to the current institution in terms of hiring practices, et cetera. So these are some things that I think that we can concretely do, at least within the federal agency.
I agree with everything that Anita and Aaron have just said. And I think the other thing you can think about doing is what we did here at UCAR when we were trying to get our office established and trying to get a culture survey approved, which is to collect microaggressions. And so we basically, for about 6 months, just wrote down every microaggression we heard. And I took that to the President's Council and gave each of them a printout and said, okay, I understand what you think this organization is. I want you to read, each of you read out, one of these microaggressions. And we got around the table like 3 times. It was embarrassing. But, at that point, like, you could hear a pin drop by the end of it. It was like, oh, this stuff gets said here. Like, yeah, it does. And, we know the organization we want to be, right? We know that. And I know the organization you thought we were, but we're not there yet. And so how can you use the evidence that you gather, not only in terms of numbers, because Anita's absolutely right, numbers talk, but also that qualitative data as well, and grab as much of that as you can to talk about it. And then go in numbers, right? One person's bringing this up, it's really hard to get heard. But if you have 5 people coming to talk to management about it, all of whom are bringing their personal stories, that can be really powerful. Well, the first thing that my boss always asks me is, how many people are bringing this to you? I'm like, hey, okay, it shouldn't matter, but fine. But that's one of the powers of an EIG, an employee resource group, right? Because when one queer person, for example, is bringing to me an issue about gender, in our people management software, that's one thing. But when an entire EIG is bringing that to me, that is more powerful. Get numbers behind it. Jeffrey, yeah, what we're calling microaggressions are often not so micro. Absolutely. And what blew my mind, honestly, Jeffrey, was that people were saying this in front of me. I was the chief diversity officer, and people were still saying this stuff. I'm like, you're supposed to be watching what you say around me. And I'm like, I am very aware that I only heard the tip of the iceberg, and wow, that was some pretty amazing stuff. So we, off the back of that, we not only got a culture survey and got my office created, but we also ended up getting some bystander intervention training into the organization to help people push back on this stuff when they hear it. Because a lot of people knew this stuff wasn't right. They just didn't have the tools to be able to push back, and they didn't know how to stand up and push back on it. So bystander intervention training is very, very helpful.
Yeah, I won't chime in on this because I think everything that has been said has been great by everybody else. And just another plug, though, definitely recommend bystander intervention training. There's some amazing resources out there that can help people understand better how to interrupt bias as it's happening, as you're witnessing it.
Great, thank you for the great insight. And then I think it's kind of a follow-on with the address from you guys. Like, what are the other resources you recommended? Like, I mean, like bystander training, it's one of the resources. And if there's any other resources that you can point it to the early career scientists so they can access it and like get to know DEI better and get involved in DEI activities better. Anyone want to chime in?
I would say if you're, thinking about either starting a DEI committee or, sort of reinvigorating one, I know this sounds silly, but I found it very helpful to Google institutions that I respect and look at their DEI committee, like their structure, their activities, what it is they're doing, and use that and, just sort of generate an idea board, I'm like, oh, I like that they're doing this, or, oh, I don't think that'll work for me. And, just kind of get an idea of what's being done and how it's being done. And I think that can be a really useful place to start, right? Because you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? That's the big thing, is a lot of times people feel a little in over their heads, or they feel like, it's just too much to kind of get a hold of. But there's great stuff out there, just do what scientists do and go out there and do some research. And I think it's really helpful to clarify, an approach and how you might want to do things.
So a couple of points here in terms of, thinking about if you're kind of buried, if you're, within a committee of an organization. So think about AGU, this is the DEI subcommittee of the atmospheric science section, which fits into the larger AGU. Thinking about the AGU, DEI strategy, what does that look like? How does this subcommittee, for instance, fit into the larger AGU? And I know that, this is kind of, I'm more just emphasizing, I think, what Cam mentioned earlier about fitting into the broader message. So thinking about that strategy, where you fit in. Another thing is developing codes of conduct. Something that has been, that has been an issue in my immediate past, has been, developing a code of conduct, and then we have an instance of bullying, for instance, and then it's not enforceable. So making sure you're working with the right people and making sure, you have a champion at a higher level, where you're working, potentially with a lawyer on what are some outcomes if that code of conduct is actually violated. For instance, if I were to come on here and say some, slanderous things, what's the code of conduct? What are the repercussions for me? Probably I might potentially get kicked out, I would hope, of this meeting, but is my AGU membership going to be revoked? Trying to figure out what is enforceable, that's a big key. And so thinking about that through and through. I had another point that I forgot, but I did want to bring up that this code of conduct piece, and so thinking about that as well, especially team building, group activities. Something happens, You hope that nothing bad ever happens, but in the event it does, you always want to be prepared. So it's better to have a code of conduct, a strategy, etc., and not need than to need and not have.
And I will add, Aaron, you're 100% right. And if you have a code of conduct and someone breaks it and it does not get enforced, it's worse than not having it. If you have it, you gotta enforce it. And so you got to make sure that people are gonna follow through, and that people, particularly in positions of power, are going to follow through. Because if people see it being flouted, that actually puts you in a deficit, because now you've attempted and people are contravening it and nobody's doing anything. Well, what does that tell you about the culture? So yeah, put it in place, but make sure you're going to be able to enforce it.
Totally agree, 100%. And Kathleen, do you have anything to add in?
Yeah, just on code of conduct, I also agree. I also want to point out, though, that it can be challenging to figure out what the process is to address these things if you don't have buy-in from leadership. So trying to develop a clear grievance policy, where there's a clear point of contact for people to go to initially, or multiple points of contact for people to go to. And there can maybe multiple routes. Like it's much more clear if it rises to the level of, a Title IX case, but for all of the more minor things that maybe don't, I think that's where the issue around enforcement is really important, but also really challenging. I don't know that maybe somebody else has good advice about how to navigate that, but something I still struggle with sometimes.
Yeah.
I just remembered my other point, and that's kind of revisiting, the DEI space, as as we can imagine, it's evolving, it's ever evolving. And so thinking about revisiting, if there's a 5-year-old strategic plan, et cetera, making sure that there's some type of revisitation period. And so thinking about, what DEI looked like, 10 years ago, was very different. And it's, again, institution by institution. And just for example, before I was the chair of BRAID, or at the time was Board on Women and Minorities for the American Meteorological Society, I was leading the Coriolis, which is the LGBT. Mostly it's just a reception for LGBT scientists. But it was very clear within, and I'll say this because there, oftentimes need to be uncomfortable situations where, it was started in 2009 for AMS. AGU, we were still under the radar. We were called GayGU at that time. We've now, just 3 years ago, we approved that we're now AGQ for AGU queers. But under AMS, we were allowed to be in the, we had the reception at the annual meeting. AGU, it wasn't until 3 years ago that we were allowed to actually have a space in the program for people to be able to come to our events. So we had underground Facebook events 5 years ago for a meeting. And so thinking about that, so just in that space, we have evolved in one of these types of affinity groups within the AGU. And so thinking about that, we now that we have space, now that, although, Randy Pfizer just left AGU, but we had the president and CEO of AGU was a gay man. We now have this type of visibility, which is great. But now there's work to do because we have been underground for so long. Friends of Dorothy is what they would say for a while. And so thinking about that, we are evolving. And so I think my emphasis here is make sure to revisit strategic plans, terms of reference, et cetera, on a regular basis. And don't, it's not just an old style type constitution that just never gets updated.
Great insights, Aaron. Anita, do you still have something to add on to it? No.
No, I was just kind of thinking about, how the webinars focus on like early career and involvement in DEI. And I was just thinking of a few things that can be very beneficial. One of the things that our department did was we made our we modified our bylaws to make the DEI committee part of our permanent committee structure. And that way it automatically syncs up with like the tenure and promotion criteria and all that, so that, you know, a lot of places their DEI committee is an ad hoc committee. So it's sort of this thing you do on the side, but it's not formally recognized in the service structure of the department. And so I think that was a really useful thing that our department did, is that right off the bat, they modified the bylaws and made it part of that committee structure. So it played into the tenure and promotion thing. The other thing I want to say about this is that DEI work, especially if you are a member of the communities that are often impacted by the whole reason we have DEI committees, it can be exhausting and draining. And so I think what I would want to caution people is to, you know, meter out your time and protect your own well-being while you're doing this kind of work, because it's very important work and there's a reason why we do it. But if you're constantly being exposed to like, oh, so and so had a microaggression problem, or oh, somebody's being a jerk to this person, or blah blah blah, it builds up. And so, you know, giving yourself time and kind of creating boundaries for yourself within your DEI role, I think, is a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Anita. That's really, really important. And I think this kind of goes back to, I don't know if it's a question that we actually got to or not, but just a question about sort of some of the challenges around around doing this work. And that's certainly one of them, is just the risk of burnout. And also, there was another question I think that was potentially going to be posed about kind of how to get more people engaged in DEI within your departments. And I think trying to get people involved, especially those maybe who are more from majority groups, is really important, because I think having enough people that you can kind of tap in and out when you need to, and don't have all the pressure placed on the most kind of vulnerable people in a space. And that's not something that's always easy to do, because a lot of us are the ones that want to be there and want to care more deeply about this work. So so I think creating a culture around, trying to create a culture in a space around this being, you know, a valued activity, and something that, you know, I don't want to be entirely cynical and say that people can do it just to, you know, help them get a job. But honestly, that sort of expectation, I think, does help motivate some people to do some of this work, who otherwise might not make the time for it. So yeah, make sure to take care of yourselves first and foremost.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then I really appreciate all your work at DEI initiative. And then we're here to support each other at the time that we need to like support, and at the point of burnout and stuff like that. So we are as a group to supporting each other. And then we're at the top of the hour. We really want to appreciate our panelists for their great insight in the DEI works they have done. And then thank you all so much to be here and then chime in on your questions and then your thoughts at DEI initiatives. And then this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be available in the future. And then let's give our panelists a round of applause here. And then thank you all very much for your time and participation in our event. We'll say bye for now, and then enjoy a great week. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great to see you / meet you, fellow panelists.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.